we carry on then to our third reader, and that is Elisabeth Shenher, and we move into fiction now. So Elisabeth is a writer from Edmonton and recently completed her MFA at the University of British Columbia. Her flash fiction has won the Australian Writers' Centre's Furious Fiction competition and has been longlisted in Room Magazine's Short Forms contest, which is also an update from the bio in the Fiddlehead. So good things are happening for our writers. I'm glad to hear it. On top of that, she's also received a grant from the Canada Council for the Arts to write a novel. In her spare time, she tells us she enjoys hiking, yoga, and buying more books she swears she'll read one day. Welcome, Elisabeth.
Thank you, Sue. It's been so wonderful to hear from Nancy and Sneha, and I am so looking forward to reading all the other wonderful works in this issue. So today I'm going to be reading from my short fiction, Last One Out, Turn Off the Lights. There were 3 filter tanks, and each required backwashing once per week. Twice per week it would have been, if the town still had as many people as it did 10 years ago when Violet first started working at the water treatment facility. Since then, a large chunk of the population had left. They'd gone west looking for jobs, east on the promise of good farming, south seeking heat. Not many went north. What was left up there besides deeper winters and short summers plagued by mosquitoes and horseflies? Besides, when Minjun was back from Busan, they would go west together, to the coast, and settle down there with a cozy apartment, and together they would have a life. So for now, Violet stayed. Every other day she rose early, before many in the town would be awake and wanting to use their water. She carried her bike down the porch stairs of her bungalow and rode up the dirt trail, over the slant in the hill, to the treatment facility. The building was a long, squat thing, surrounded by a measure of chain-link fence that had been once topped with barbed wire. Sections now had caved in, and many of the once sharp links were dull with rust and time. Violet would put the key in the lock, unwind the chain, open the gate, and then lock it back up behind her. After Violet let herself inside the building and slipped into the coveralls, she'd start the backwash. It was a thing that involved her whole body, and, having done it often enough, very little of her conscious mind. An easy pattern, a familiar rhythm. She cut off the power to the filters by throwing the big switch. The lever would clang down with a rattle she felt in the back of her teeth. She'd isolate the pump she'd be working on that day by turning the wheel valve shut, and, from there, it was on to the filter. The filters were giant metal canisters, nearly the size of a bus. The metal had a worn quality to it, as if they'd been made and hammered out by hand, though Violet had no idea if that was true or not. They were brought in specifically from Germany and meant to be used in swimming pools, but some 60 years ago when they were first building the town, they decided they would work well to filter the water from the winding river that bunched up against the eastern wall. Violet liked that the muscles in her arms tired out from wheeling the valves. Like a snake, she'd wind her way through the mess of pipes and squeeze between the belly of the filter and the concrete wall to get to whatever tank she was working on. And, when she was done, she'd wind her way back out, open the valves that had to be open, close the valves that had to be closed, and pull the lever again and feel it in her teeth again, and the water would run again, all the way out to the town. Her favorite part of all, though, was in the middle, when the system was in reverse, and the pipe to the waste pit was open. She'd throw the switch then, too, and the system would lurch into backwards action. If it were done properly, she'd once been told, the runoff would be whisked away in a pipe. But the system was not done properly, and instead of neatly disappearing, the system dumped water into an open pit in the ground. Once it had been covered with a hard plastic grate, but that had long since disintegrated. All that was left was the hole cut in the ground that led back out to the river, eventually, downstream of the intake. Violet stood on the edge, always, even though she'd been instructed to stay far back. Her heart crescendoed with the gush of water. First clear, then more and more filthy as the layers of sediment and grime that were caught in the inner systems worked their way back out. But Violet never stepped back. After having done it all, she would bike back to the house that had once been her grandfather's and plan out her day. The dust had been bad again this summer, and she would have to clean the floors, wash the bed sheets, and wipe the shelves. Her mother would be expecting a letter, and Minjun always liked apples the best, and apparently the market had gotten a shipment in yesterday. How nice would it be to surprise Minjun with apples and clean sheets and floors that shone despite the dust? The sun was up in full by the time Violet reached her street. Hot streaks beat down on her legs, which were tanned and muscled, and the tank top she wore today was one she hadn't worn yet this summer. It revealed pale skin that would soon be red. Before she reached her bungalow, though, Violet stopped. She pressed her toes to the pavement and balanced on her seat, unmoving. There, on the bottom step of the porch, sat Jake. The giant pack rested against the cement step, and he held the dying stub of a cigarette. "Hi, Vi," he said, and raised his hand. A slight smile split across his face, which was caked in a layer of dust. His hair and beard had grown out longer than Violet had ever seen. Back when they were teens, back when they were together, he'd always kept it just so. "You're back." Violet stepped off her bike and came up the sidewalk, slow, still not entirely certain that the stooped man on her doorstep wasn't an apparition. He told her that he was back, at least for now, and followed at her heels like a puppy into her house. "Last I heard you were in Edinburgh." She set the bike on the hook and walked to the fridge, took out the pitcher, and poured them both water. "Glasgow," he said. "I was." He took the water and drank the whole thing. Where he rested his hand on the countertop, he left a reddish streak behind. She asked what had happened as they sat down together at the kitchen table. He'd left not long after they broke up. Perhaps he'd left because they'd broken up. And when he left, he made sure to let her know exactly what he thought of this place, this town, this life. That had been 6 years ago now. "I went to live with my dad," he explained, and Violet nodded along. She'd known he'd done that, and she said Edinburgh on purpose, even though she'd known all along that it was Glasgow. But she didn't want to let him know that she still knew, that she still thought about him, that she still spent too much time staring at the globe Minjun left in the basement, pressing her fingertip against the little dot that read Glasgow, before turning the world under her palm and pressing the pad of her finger against the dot on the edge of South Korea that read Busan. "And now you're back," Violet said. She leaned back against the chair. Sunlight slanted across the floorboards and caught on the layer of dust. "I am," he said. Jake bundled his hands together and looked down at his fingers. And that was that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I don't know how easy it is for the readers to see everybody's hands going when you're switching back off the screen, but they're there. I love the story. It made me feel very tenderly toward Violet, who made me feel very tenderly toward the water treatment facility. Beautifully done.